All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, we briefly touched yesterday on some new data that was crunched by the New York Times, revealing exactly which zip codes across America have more Biden or Trump donors. And I've long said here that the most important thing about a candidate is not who postures for them on TV or the rhetoric that they espouse, but the people who vote with their dollars and feel compelled to give them money. It is the ultimate sign that those people believe in their message. No matter how you want to style it, it's actually going to work on their behalf. Well, lo and behold, what exactly did this data find? The Times analysis begins, quote, Joe Biden has outraised President Trump on the strength of some of the wealthiest and most educated zip codes in the United States, running up a fundraising score in cities and suburbs. The rest of the piece details how college-educated white voters across America are fleeing the Republican Party in favor of Joe Biden's candidacy at a massive rate, giving him both an electoral and moneyed edge going into the next election. Let's put it this way. In zip codes that have median household incomes of at least $100,000, which you might consider a metropolitan area or a suburban area, Joe Biden raised $486 million, while Trump raised only $167 million. If you switch that around, you can see that Biden actually raised $581 million from zip codes with median household incomes of less than $100,000, with Trump raising $565 million. But look at the proportions. More than 3/4 of the Trump campaign's money is coming from households below $100,000. And that's just income. The real divider is even more stark. The Times finds that in zip codes, where at least 65% of people had graduated from college, that Joe Biden outraised Trump $478 million to $100 million. For those with a supermajority that didn't attend college, those people overwhelmingly supported President Trump. In those numbers right there, you see the futures of both parties. Joe Biden can talk a big game about Scranton versus Park Avenue all he wants. The truth is, the people on Park Avenue desperately want him to be president. And with the Times finding that the New York City alone has contributed more money to his campaign than any other state in the country except California, it is simply a fact. The wealthiest people in America want Joe Biden to be president. From Wall Street bankers to Silicon Valley titans to the professional service class that has been enriched by financialization and globalization, to the college industrial complex, the moneyed elite is all in. And it has profound implications for the future of the GOP. Because yes, Trump has governed like a traditional Romney-esque Republican, but his rhetoric alone, his stand as a bulwark against the cultural left, has revealed the only path forward for the Republican Party. If college-educated whites, suburbanites, billionaires, Silicon Valley, and every other destructive force in our society puts Joe Biden into the Oval Office, it is over. That's the Democratic Party. Plain and simple. They will govern in such a way that I will think they will put George W. Bush to shame. Rahm Emanuel was onto something earlier this election season when he opined that Biden's best bet was to transform upper-middle-class GOP voters who like people like John Kasich, John McCain, and Jeff Flake into Biden Republicans. If you get the Oval Office on their backs and you govern in such a way that pleases them, they will be with you forever, like the Reagan Democrats. Which leaves the GOP with a simple choice if Trump is gone. They can choose to scream and cry and beg for these upper-middle-class voters to come back, which is never going to happen, since most of them have now been through the university system, and they think that any association with the Republican Party is akin to Nazism itself. Or they can look to the only opportunity that lies before them, because embedded within the New York Times data is some deep wisdom. And it's actually from a Democratic analyst named Anna Greenberg. She told the paper that, quote, in the short term, all these upper-middle-class educated suburbanites flocking to Biden was a gift financially, but warned that in the long run, the risk was that her party was going to fall out of touch with the working class, both white and non-white, reminding them that, quote, 60% of this country is still without a college degree. That's the opportunity. Nobody wants to hear it, but the untold story of the Trump era is he actually deracialized, to the extent that there is, political support to levels that we have not seen in generations. He starkly divided the electorate by class and educational lines. As we covered today, Joe Biden is behind in Texas, according to the latest New York Times Siena poll, not because he hasn't made stupendous gains amongst white suburban voters, but because Hispanic voters are backing Trump at a higher margin than they did Hillary Clinton in 2016. And these voters are disproportionately more likely to not have a 4-year college degree or the same economic profile of those activated by Joe Biden's appeal. Same story in Florida. It's the same story across the Sun Belt, across the Midwest. And think about this. This is the story when Donald Trump has basically governed as a Mitt Romney-type Republican with some Chinese tariffs. Can you actually imagine if somebody came along who talked and governed like he said he would in 2016? That person would win this election by a landslide. But Trump has made his choice. That's on him. Now the choice is up to the broader Republican Party. They can choose to try and fail to win back these suburban voters, given the shifts toward woke and identity politics, and we've seen amongst the college-educated elite in aggregate, or they can go after the working man in every single racial demographic. That's literally the only way they will ever hold elected office again in modern history. I know many of you think that this is fantastical, but the numbers don't lie. Despite many of his foolhardy decisions, takes, and shenanigans over the years, Trump has actually transformed the party into one supported by the working class and only them. Now, it is incumbent upon their representatives to do what they have failed to do for nearly 25 years, which is actually govern in a way that supports working class people. If they can do that, then they win. If they don't, then they lose. I won't say I'm optimistic, but I'm not going to stop pointing it out. And it's kind of incredible. I mean, you look at this downstream data, and you see, all of this money flowing in from, it's all of these college-educated, upper-middle-class, white suburbanites across the whole country.
Yeah.
Pretty much the only white suburbanites who support Trump are the holdover of the small business class who, or Jeb, these are also the boat parade people, by the way. I call them replacement level GOP voters. As in, those people will always
They'll be
around.
there no matter what.
No matter what. They're,
I
that's
like
fine.
that term.
I like them. They're good people, but you can't win an election on their backs. And you probably shouldn't be touting their endorsement. But you look at the downstream data. You look at the college-educated data in particular.
Yeah.
That is the story to me. 65% of in a zip code with 65% non-college educated, they back Trump by a mile.
Yeah.
And that's most of the country.
There's part of your analysis I agree with, and part of it that I think is overstated. Because we have to still look at the numbers. The bottom line is Trump maybe is going to get 9% with black voters. He's maybe going to get it's a third of the Latino vote. So there's still
actually, in some states.
It's still a deeply racialized electorate. And there's still a long way to go. If you look at the numbers, I'd be curious. Hillary Clinton ultimately last time around did win more working class voters than Donald Trump. And so this time, if he loses, I would certainly suspect that overall Joe Biden wins more working class voters than he does overall. So part of why the Trump base has become more working class is because of gains among Latinos and some modest gains among black voters. But it's more a game of subtraction where he's lost some of the support that he had last time around from suburbanites, who a lot of whom sort of sucked it up and voted for him, even though they had reservations, and this time they're firmly on Team D. So there's that aspect. And even if you look at his core base of support, rural white voters and white non-college educated voters, he's even seen some erosion, modest erosion among those voters too. He's lost some of those Obama-Trump voters are now planning to vote for Joe Biden. It's a relatively small percentage, but it could be significant and make the difference in these states. So all of this is a long way to say that I don't think any of this is set in stone or determined whatsoever. For me, the far more likely outcome than the Republican Party becoming a working class party is that both the parties basically stay like they are, neither one of them representing the working class. The Democratic Party, yes, they have this consolidation of upper middle class suburbanites who they have decided they're going to cater to wholesale. The Republican Party is still, look at their actions during the stimulus. They are still catering to the financial elite of this country and around the world. So I think that is the far more likely outcome, unfortunately, which is that the working class stays split between both the parties, which means that they are ultimately marginalized in terms of the political conversation. And the last factor that I think we both try to always surface and talk about is the fact that the majority of working class voters they don't vote at all.
Yes.
They don't support either one of these parties. And I think that may be more the trend than either of the parties really gaining them, is more and more people bleeding out of the system and saying, look, none of these people ultimately represent my interests.
I agree with most of what you said except this. Difference is the Dems can keep winning elections by being the party of the upper middle class. The GOP can't. These people are Democrats now. If you went through the college system, especially at this time, you're not going to be a Republican. Maybe like 2 out of 10 of you. And so that means you only have one choice in the long run. And, you know, they don't have the stones to actually go after the college system right now. Maybe they will in the future. If they want to be a permanent minority party, which many of them do, it's very lucrative. You can make a lot of money. And I think that's probably the way that it'll go for the next, 4 to 5 years. But let's say in the next primary, something big could happen. This is basically it. I mean, this is the only way that I see they could actually win. College-educated white people, or college-educated people in general, are not coming to the GOP for cultural reasons. They've been infected by wokeism. It's over. And I generally think that. Which means you can win some of them on the margins, but by and large, I think it's done. Which means that you have to go after the Hispanic and the black vote. And again, you only need to win 15% of the black vote. And in 2020, the Hispanics are now the largest minority group in the entire United States, overtaking the black population. So if you win, Trump is going to win about 40% of them. And that's a lot. So if you make up to 50, there you go. That's an entire coalition.
But you're assuming a level of rationality that I'm not sure exists. Because if you think of any individual political actor within the Republican Party, it's not at all clear that this would be in their best interest. Because you have a lot of people who represent either gerrymandered districts or states that are deep red, part of that polarization. Yeah. And so what you get instead of let me actually, broaden out my rhetoric, let me not, use some of these dog whistles that we've been using for decades. Let me actually have a working class agenda that supports wage growth, unionization, and things that working class voters, healthcare might actually respond to, which we should be clear is the polar opposite of what the GOP has been doing for decades now. So I think it will be very hard for them to shift. And again, in those districts, a lot of times you're more worried about a challenge from the Tea Party right than you are winning over a larger general electorate. So I'm not sure that the level of rationality that you're projecting onto them is actually going to exist. And then the other thing that I would say here is what we've actually seen as a strategy from the Republican Party and individual Republican actors isn't, hey, let's try to appeal to more voters. It's, hey, why don't we try to change the rules so that the electorate more matches our base? They already have an overwhelming advantage in terms of winning the Senate. Right? They're very likely. They're about to lose the Senate because they've been so egregious, but there is a very easy path to them taking back the Senate, no problem. If Democrats win in Iowa, you could easily see that seat flipping back, et cetera. If they pick up a seat in Georgia, you could easily see that seat flipping back. So they already have an electoral college advantage. They already have a Senate advantage. They already have a 6-3 Supreme Court that can help them rewrite those rules. And I'm not saying that's going to work, but I am saying that is the trajectory and the path that a lot of Republicans have been betting on, much more so over the past few years than actually trying to expand the electorate.
It only works for so long. And I'll point to Texas. A lot of these Texas Republicans are about to get clobbered because they got gerrymandered with the assumption that these suburban voters are going to vote
stay with
Republican.
Them.
And now they're not. So if you want to win, there's only one way to win. Look, this is a long process. Parties realign over 25 years. That's what Reagan did. It took 16 years from Barry Goldwater to the future. This is just how I see the only possible way forward. Look, you could try and gerrymander your way out of this. It's not going to work in terms of the way the population and the way that voting patterns and other things are moving. And so, 6-3 on the Supreme Court, I think it's great. But it's not going to save you in many different ways. And, we have had 15 of the 19 last Supreme Court justices appointed by Republicans, which Democrats always like to point to. Gay marriage is law of the land. Abortion's still fine. The only thing that's happened is now we have an economic liberalization. So I'm not buying, the doomsday scenario from the social left on a lot of this. And I think, we should point to that and say, that's generally how I think it's going to go in the future. So again, if the Republicans want to win in this data, this is the only way I see how it's going to be possible. And look, maybe they want to be permanent minority party. Go for it. If you want to enjoy being losers, They've done it for a long time.
It's easy to be the minority party.
Very rich.
Indeed.
All right, I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.